My son's wife said I talked too much, but she forgot my words built her husband's success. I remember the exact shape of her mouth when she said it. It wasn't a shout. It was a sigh, sharp and dismissive, like someone blowing out a candle that was providing the only light in the room. She looked at me across the mahogany table, her eyes tired of my presence, and declared that my voice was a burden. She didn't know then that my voice was the very thing that had constructed the roof over her head. She didn't understand that silence, when forced upon a mother, is not peace. It is a withdrawal of grace. And when the grace lifts, the storm begins. Welcome home, my dears. It is Grandma Alice here, sitting in the quiet of the evening to share a story that is close to my heart. Before we open the book of memory today, I have a small favor to ask of you. We are trying to grow this family of ours, to gather more souls around this fire. If these stories touch your spirit, please press that subscribe button. Help me reach 1,000 subscribers before next week, so we can keep the wisdom flowing. Now, let me tell you about the price of silence. They say that behind every great man is a woman, but they usually mean a wife. In my son David's case, the woman standing behind him, pushing him up the hill when his legs were too weak to climb, was his mother. David was not born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He was born with a plastic spoon in a studio apartment that smelled of damp wood and boiled cabbage. I raised him on my own, stitching other people's clothes until my fingers were calloused and my eyes were dim, just so he could have books. But more than books, I gave him words. I talked to him constantly. When he was 5 and afraid of the dark, I didn't just turn on a light. I told him stories about how the moon needed the darkness to shine. When he was 12 and bullied for his second-hand shoes, I told him, David, a king walks with his head high even if he is barefoot. It is the stride that makes the man, not the leather on his soles. And when he was 25, terrified of his first big interview at a finance firm where everyone else wore suits that cost more than our car, I sat him down at our chipped kitchen table. He was shaking. He wanted to quit before he even started. I talked for 2 hours that night. I poured confidence into him like water into a dry vase. I told him exactly what to say, how to pause, how to look a man in the eye and make him feel like he needed David, not the other way around. He got the job. Over the next 10 years, that pattern never changed. Every major contract, every promotion, every crisis, David would come to me. We would sit, I would speak, he would listen, and then he would succeed. My words were the invisible architecture of his empire. I was the secret partner in the firm of his life. Then came Elena. Elena was beautiful, I will give her that. She was sharp, modern, and polished, like a diamond that cuts glass. She worked in marketing, and she spoke in buzzwords, synergy, optics, bandwidth. She moved fast, and she expected the world to move at her pace. When David introduced us, she looked at me with a polite, tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. She saw a little old woman in a cardigan. She saw a relic. She didn't see the architect. When they married, I was happy for him. I truly was. A mother wants her son to be loved. When David suggested I move into the guest suite of their new, sprawling estate in the suburbs, I hesitated. I liked my small, quiet life, but David insisted. Mom, I want you close, he said, gripping my hand. I still need you. So, I sold my little house. I packed my life into boxes and moved into a home that felt more like a museum than a place for living. Everything was white, gray, or chrome. There were no knickknacks, no soft edges, just sharp lines and cold surfaces. The trouble began slowly, like a leak in a roof you don't notice until the ceiling stains. Elena found my stories tedious. At breakfast, if I started to tell David about the news or a memory from the past, she would check her watch. She would tap her perfectly manicured fingernails against the granite countertop. Tap, tap, tap. A rhythm of impatience. David, we have to go, she would interrupt, cutting me off mid-sentence. We don't have time for the long version today, Alice. First, I smiled it away. She is young, I told myself. She is busy. The world rushes them so much these days. But the interruptions grew frequent. And worse, David began to change. In the presence of his wife, the son who used to hang on my every word started to shrink. He would look at me with apologetic eyes, but he would stand up and leave when she commanded it. He started trading my wisdom for her approval. The air in the house grew heavy. I felt like a ghost haunting a place where I was still alive. If I offered advice on how to cook a roast so it wouldn't dry out, Elena would smile that icy smile and say, "We use a sous vide machine, Alice. It's science. We don't need old wives' tales." If I told her that the new cleaning lady was stealing silver because I had watched her eyes, Elena would sigh. "You're imagining things, Alice. You're just bored." I was being erased, sentence by sentence. The climax of this slow erasure happened on a Tuesday night in November. It was raining hard, the kind of rain that lashes against the windows like it's trying to break in. The atmosphere inside the house was just as stormy. David's company was facing a hostile takeover. He had been pacing the living room floor for 3 nights, barely sleeping. His face was gray, his eyes rimmed with red. He was losing his grip, and I could feel his panic radiating off him like heat from a stove. Dinner was a somber affair. The only sound was the clinking of silverware against china. Elena was on her phone, scrolling through emails, ignoring the tension. David pushed his food around his plate, his shoulders hunched. Finally, he dropped his fork. "I don't know what to do," he whispered, his voice cracking. "If I sign the merger, I lose control. If I don't, they bury us in legal fees for a year. I'm cornered." He looked at me. For a fleeting second, he wasn't the CEO. He was the boy with the plastic spoon, asking his mother how to survive. My heart swelled. This was my moment. I knew exactly what he needed to hear. I had seen this before, not in business, but in life. It was a matter of leverage and patience. "David," I said softly, leaning forward, "you are looking at the wall, not the door. When your father and I were almost evicted in '82, the landlord thought he had all the power. But I knew something he didn't. You see, silence is a negotiator too. If you wait, if you let them think you are unafraid of the court battle, they will blink first. But you must be willing to stand in the rain without an umbrella for a little while. You remember the story of the old miller who..." Clang. Elena dropped her knife onto her plate. The sound rang through the dining room like a gunshot. She turned her head slowly to look at me. Her expression wasn't just annoyed anymore. It was venomous. "Oh my God, Alice. Stop," she snapped. I froze. "Excuse me? Just stop," Elena said, her voice rising. "He is dealing with a multimillion-dollar merger, and you're talking about a landlord in 1982 and some old miller? Do you ever hear yourself? You talk so much." The room went deadly silent. The rain hammered against the glass. "You ramble, Alice," she continued, emboldened by the silence. "You just go on and on with these pointless stories that have nothing to do with our reality. David needs actual advice. He needs legal counsel. He doesn't need fairy tales from a retired seamstress. You are adding noise to a situation that requires clarity. Can't you just be quiet? For once." The insult slapped me across the face, harder than a physical blow. Pointless stories? Fairy tales? I looked at David. This was the turning point. This was the moment where he would slam his hand on the table and tell her that the retired seamstress had saved his life a dozen times. I waited for him to say, "Don't speak to her like that." I looked at my son. David looked down at his plate. He picked up his wine glass, took a sip, and didn't say a word. He chose her. He chose the peace of his marriage over the dignity of his mother. He let her words stand. He let her call my wisdom noise. A coldness settled in my chest, colder than the grave. It wasn't the anger of a moment. It was the deep, freezing realization of a new reality. They thought my words were useless. They thought my voice was a hindrance. Very well. I slowly placed my napkin on the table. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't defend myself. I simply looked at Elena, and then I looked at David. I see, I said. My voice was steady, low, and terrifyingly calm. I did not realize my voice was taking up so much room in this house. You are right, Elena. Clarity is important. And sometimes, the only way to appreciate the music is to experience the silence. I stood up. My knees creaked, but my spine was steel. I won't bother you with my stories anymore, I whispered. I walked out of the dining room, leaving them alone with their expensive furniture and their cold, modern silence. I walked up the stairs to my guest suite, the heavy thud of my heart counting the steps. I closed my door and locked it. That night, as I sat by the window watching the rain drown the garden below, I felt a shift in the universe. I knew something they didn't. I knew that by silencing me, they had just severed the anchor that held their ship steady. David thought he was avoiding a fight with his wife. He didn't realize he had just walked into a war with destiny. Downstairs, I heard the television turn on. They were moving on. They thought the problem was solved. The noise was gone. But as I turned off my bedside lamp, plunging my room into darkness, I whispered to the empty air, "You want silence? I will give you a silence so loud it will shake the foundation of this house." The lesson had begun, and they weren't ready for the tuition they were about to pay. My dears, the silence has fallen over the house, but the storm is just beginning. What happens to a man when the voice that guided him suddenly stops? And what will Elena do when the noise she hated is the only thing that could save her? You will have to wait for chapter 2 to see how the bricks begin to crumble. Until then, remember, be careful whose voice you silence, for you might just be muting your own guardian angel. The house was quiet the next morning. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a church or a library. It was the suffocating quiet of a waiting room before a doctor delivers bad news. I walked into the kitchen, my slippers making no sound on the cold marble floor. David and Elena were already there. Usually, I would greet them with a song, or a remark about the birds outside, or a thought I had during my morning prayers. Today, I said nothing. I poured my tea, sat at the far end of the table, and watched the steam rise. The silence was so heavy you could almost reach out and choke it. They had asked for peace. I was giving them a graveyard. My friends, it warms my old heart to see you gathered here again for the next chapter of our story. We are walking through the valley of shadows today, seeing what happens when wisdom is shut out in the cold. Before we continue, I have a small favor to ask. We are growing this family one story at a time. If you want to see how this lesson ends, please press that subscribe button. Help me reach 1,000 subscribers before next week. It would mean the world to this grandmother to know her voice is still being heard by someone. Now, let us see what grew in the garden of silence. You never realize how much noise a person makes until they are gone. But I wasn't gone. I was right there. I was a statue in their home, a breathing fixture that offered no warmth, no light, and no direction. For the first week, I could see the relief on Elena's face. She moved through the house with a lightness I hadn't seen before. She felt victorious. She had managed the problem. She had tamed the mother-in-law. To her, my silence was a clean surface, uncluttered and modern, just like her furniture. David, however, was twitching. He sat across from me at breakfast 3 days after the incident. His eyes were darting around the room, looking for an opening. He was waiting for me to ask about the merger. He was waiting for me to say, "David, you look pale. Eat your eggs. And remember, a desperate man signs bad contracts." But I just buttered my toast. Scrape, scrape, scrape. "Mom," he finally said, his voice tentative. The partners are pushing for a decision by Friday. They threaten to walk if I don't sign. I looked up. I chewed slowly. I swallowed. "Is that so?" I asked politely. Pass the sugar, please. David blinked. He looked at Elena, then back at me. I feel like they're bluffing, but the legal team says the offer is solid. What do you think? This was the test. This was the moment where the old Alice would have launched into a story about your grandfather's poker games in the Navy. A story that would have taught David that a man who threatens to walk is usually the one most desperate to stay. I would have told him to hold the line. I would have told him to let them walk to the door, because they would turn around before they touched the handle. I looked at Elena. She was watching me over the rim of her coffee mug, her eyes narrowing, daring me to lecture. I smiled a thin, paper-dry smile. I think you have a very expensive legal team, David. Surely they know best. I am just a retired seamstress. What would I know about mergers? David flinched. The reference to Elena's insult hit its mark. He slumped in his chair, defeated. Right, he mumbled. Right. He signed the deal on Friday. I knew he had signed it because he came home with a bottle of champagne that cost more than my first car. They celebrated in the living room. Elena was glowing, talking about bonuses and trips to the Maldives. David was laughing, but his laugh was too loud, too brittle. It was the laugh of a man trying to convince himself he hadn't just made a mistake. I sat in my chair in the corner, knitting a scarf. Click, clack, click, clack. Aren't you going to have a glass, Alice? Elena asked, feeling generous in her victory. David just secured the company's future. I am tired, I said softly. I will go to bed. Enjoy your victory. I didn't tell them that the champagne tasted like vinegar to me. I didn't tell them that I had read the papers that morning. The financial section they thought I was too simple to understand. And I knew the company David had just merged with was carrying hidden debt that wasn't in the prospectus. I knew because I remembered the CEO's name from a scandal 10 years ago. A name I would have warned David about. But warnings are words. And I was done with words. The second crack in the foundation appeared 2 weeks later. And this time it was in Elena's domain. I was sitting in the sunroom, reading a novel, when the cleaning lady, Marta, came in to dust. Marta had been with them for 2 months. She had shifting eyes. I had mentioned it once, and Elena had called me paranoid. I watched over the top of my book. Elena had left her engagement ring, a massive, glittering thing, on the side table near the vase of lilies while she applied hand cream. She had walked out to answer a phone call. Marta dusted the table. She dusted the vase. Then, with a move as quick as a magician, her hand swept over the ring. In a blink, it was gone, dropped into the deep pocket of her apron. My heart hammered. Stop her, my instinct screamed. Call out. Tell David. But then I heard Elena's voice from the hallway. Honestly, she's just sulking. It's better this way. The house is so much more peaceful without her constant droning. I sat back. I turned the page of my book. Marta finished dusting and walked out of the room. I let her go. The explosion happened that evening. It was right here. Elena was screaming, tearing the cushions off the sofa. I put it right here next to the lilies. David was on his hands and knees, looking under the rug. Are you sure, Elle? Maybe you left it upstairs. I am not crazy, David. I took it off to put on lotion. It's gone. She stood up, her face red, hair wild. Then, her eyes snapped to me. I was sitting in the same chair, knitting. Alice, she said, her voice trembling with accusation. You were in here all afternoon. Did you see anything? I stopped knitting. I looked at her calm, panicked face. I was reading, I said simply. But did you see anyone? Did Marta come in? Marta dusted, I said. And she dusted, I repeated. She did a very thorough job. Did you see her take it? Elena demanded. I looked her dead in the eye. Elena, you told me that I imagine things. You told me my eyesight is failing and my mind makes up stories. If I told you what I saw, wouldn't I just be rambling again? Elena gasped. She knew. In that second, she knew that I knew. You let her take it, she whispered, horrified. I let you run your house. I corrected her gently. I am just a guest here. I wouldn't want to interfere with your staff. She screamed in frustration and ran to the phone to call the agency. But it was too late. Marta was gone, and the ring was halfway to a pawn shop in the city. The house began to rot from the inside out. November turned to December. The weather turned gray, matching the atmosphere in the dining room. The silence I offered was no longer passive. It was aggressive. It was a mirror reflecting their incompetence. Without my mediation, David and Elena began to fight. Really fight. Before, when they bickered, I would interject with a joke or a distracting question, steering them back to calm waters. Now, I let them crash into the rocks. They fought about the missing ring. They fought about money. And then the true storm arrived. The merger. It started with late-night phone calls. David would pace the hallway at 2 a.m., his voice hushed and frantic. What do you mean the audit failed? We already signed. No, you told me the debt was structured. I lay in my bed, listening to the floorboards creak under his pacing feet. I knew this walk. It was the walk of a man who realizes he has walked off a cliff and is only now looking down. One Tuesday evening, the same day of the week the silence had begun, David came home early. He didn't greet anyone. He walked straight to the liquor cabinet and poured a drink, his hand shaking so badly the glass clinked against the bottle. Elena was in the kitchen, looking at invoices. David? What are you doing home? He turned to her. He looked aged, withered. It's over, he croaked. What's over? The merger. It was a trap. They hid the liabilities in a shell company. The debt is ours now. All of it. Elena dropped the papers. How much? David laughed. A dry, hysterical sound. Everything. The liquidity is gone. The stock tanked 40% this morning. The board is calling for a vote of no confidence. They're going to fire me, Elena. They're going to fire me from my own company. The silence that followed wasn't the one I had created. It was the silence of ruin. Elena looked at him, and then, slowly, she looked at me. I was standing in the doorway, witnessing the collapse. You knew, David said. He wasn't looking at Elena. He was looking at me. His eyes were wet. Mom, you knew, didn't you? You always know. Why didn't you stop me? My heart broke for him. He was my boy. I wanted to rush to him, to hold him, to tell him we would fix it. But then I saw Elena. She wasn't looking at me with apology. She was looking at me with anger. She was blaming me for her husband's failure, blaming me for obeying her command. She did this on purpose, Elena hissed, stepping toward David. Look at her. She's standing there gloating. She wanted you to fail so she could prove a point. I did no such thing, I said, my voice steady, though my hands trembled in the folds of my skirt. I simply did what you asked. I kept my stories to myself. I kept my noise down. You watched him ruin his life. Elena screamed. What kind of mother does that? The kind who respects her son's wife. I shot back, my voice finally rising, sharp as a whip. You told me my words were useless. You told me my wisdom was a fairy tale. Well, my dear, welcome to reality. Reality is what happens when you don't listen to the map because you think you know the road better than the one who paved it. David slumped against the counter, sliding down until he was sitting on the floor, head in his hands. Stop it, he sobbed. Please, just stop. The doorbell rang. It was a jarring, mechanical sound that cut through the screaming. We all froze. Who would be visiting in the middle of a funeral? David didn't move. Elena wiped her face, fixed her hair, and went to the door. I stayed where I was, watching my son broken on the kitchen floor. I heard the heavy oak door open. I heard a deep, unfamiliar voice. Mrs. Elena Vance? Yes. I'm here on behalf of the distinct creditors of Vance Global. This is a formal notice of asset seizure. We need you to vacate the premises within 30 days while the investigation into the fraud allegations is conducted. Elena's voice was a squeak. Fraud? Asset seizure? Vacate this house. I'm afraid so, ma'am. Your husband signed as a personal guarantor on the bridge loan. The bank owns the house now. Elena staggered back into the hallway, a piece of yellow legal paper in her hand. She looked at the paper, then at the grand staircase, the chandelier, the life she had curated so perfectly. It was all gone. One signature, one missing piece of advice, one silence. She looked at David, who hadn't moved. Then she looked at me. For the first time since I met her, the arrogance was gone. Her face was pale, stripped of its mask. Fear, raw and ugly, stood in her eyes. Alice, she whispered, her voice shaking. We have nowhere to go. I looked at her. I looked at the yellow paper. I looked at my son, who was now weeping silently into his palms. I could have fixed this a month ago. I could have fixed this last week. But now, the avalanche had already fallen. I walked over to the hook by the back door and took down my coat. Where are you going? David asked, looking up, panic rising in his voice. Mom? Where are you going? I buttoned my coat. I picked up my purse. I am going for a walk, I said. I find that when the house gets too loud with shouting, it is best to find some fresh air. You can't leave us, Elena cried, grabbing my arm. Alice, please. You have to know what to do. You always know what to do. Fix it. Talk to us. I looked down at her hand on my sleeve, the same hand that had dismissed me at the dinner table. I'm sorry, Elena, I said softly, pulling my arm away. But I think I've talked enough. Besides, I'm just a retired seamstress. What could I possibly do about a seizure notice? I opened the back door and stepped out into the cold night air. Behind me, the wailing began. But as I walked into the dark garden, I wasn't just walking away. I was thinking, because even though they had broken my heart, he was still my son. And while I had taught them a lesson they would never forget, the final exam was yet to come. I knew a man from the old days, a man who owed me a favor from 1982. I reached into my purse and pulled out a phone that was much older than theirs. I dialed a number I hadn't called in 20 years. It rang once, twice. Hello? A gruff voice answered. Hello, Thomas, I said, my voice strong again. It's Alice. We need to talk. My dears, the house has fallen, and the pride has shattered. David and Elena are standing in the ruins of their own making. But Grandma Alice has made a call. Who is Thomas? And can a favor from 40 years ago save a fortune lost today? Or is it too little, too late? You will have to tune in for the final chapter to see if redemption is possible, or if some bridges are truly burned forever. Until next time, keep your ears open to wisdom, and remember, it is better to listen to a harsh truth than to be comforted by a silent lie. The hardest thing a mother ever has to do is stand back and let the world break her child, just so he can learn how to put himself back together. Standing in the freezing garden that night, phone pressed to my ear, I watched the lights of the great house flicker. Inside, my son was losing everything. But out here in the dark, I was arranging the only lifeline that could pull him from the wreckage. I wasn't doing it for the house. I wasn't doing it for the money. I was doing it because eventually the silence has to end. And when it does, someone needs to have the right words to say. Welcome back to the fire, my dears. We have reached the end of our journey together. We have seen the pride and we have seen the fall. Now we must walk through the redemption. It is a rocky path, but the view from the other side is worth it. Before I close this book, I ask you one last time. If these stories have found a home in your heart, please press that subscribe button. We are building a community of wisdom here, and I would love for you to be a part of it. Now, let us see if a broken foundation can ever truly be repaired. Thomas, I said into the receiver. It's been a long time. There was a pause on the other end, a silence thick with 40 years of history. Then a low, gravelly chuckle. Alice Vance, I thought you'd retired to a beach somewhere. To what do I owe the pleasure? You finally ready to cash in that chip from '82? I am, I said, my voice steady. But I don't need money, Thomas. I need a meeting. Tomorrow morning. 8 o'clock. For who? For my son. And the sharks who are currently circling his carcass. Thomas laughed again. For you, Alice? I'll clear my schedule. I hung up the phone. I wiped the cold mist from my face and walked back inside. The kitchen was quiet now. The screaming had stopped. David was sitting on a stool, staring at his hands. Elena was slumped against the refrigerator, her face a ruin of mascara and tears. They looked up when I entered. They looked like frightened children waiting for a scolding. Pack your bags, I said quietly. What? Elena whispered. The bank gave you 30 days, but your dignity shouldn't wait that long. We are leaving tonight. I have a small rental property on the south side. It has 2 bedrooms and a leaky faucet. It is not what you are used to, but it has a roof. Mom, David choked out. I can't believe this is happening. Belief has nothing to do with it, David. Consequences do. Now move. We have a meeting at 8 a.m., and you need to look like a CEO, not a corpse. The next month was the longest of their lives. We moved into the small apartment. It was a stark contrast to the mansion. The walls were thin, smelling faintly of old cooking oil and pine cleaner. The traffic noise outside was constant. There was no maid, no sous vide machine, just a small gas stove and a table that wobbled. For the first week, Elena didn't speak. She moved through the small rooms like a sleepwalker. She had lost her status, her jewelry, and her home. She was stripped bare. But in that small space, something miraculous happened. The silence she had once demanded was gone, replaced by the necessary noise of survival. We had to talk to coordinate the bathroom schedule. We had to talk to budget for groceries. One evening, I found Elena standing over the stove, trying to make a stew. She was crying silently, the tears dripping into the pot. She had burned the onions. I walked over and gently took the wooden spoon from her hand. You have the flame too high, I said softly. Onions need patience, Elena. If you rush them, they turn bitter. Just like people. She didn't snap at me. She didn't roll her eyes. She just leaned her head against my shoulder and sobbed. It wasn't a polite cry. It was a deep, guttural release of shame. I ruined it, she wept. I ruined everything. I thought I was so smart. I thought you were just an old woman who didn't know anything. I stirred the pot, scraping the burnt bits away. I am an old woman, I said. But the thing about being old, my dear, is that I have made every mistake you are making now. I have just had 40 years to learn how to fix them. She looked up at me, her eyes red. Can we fix this? Really? I turned off the stove. Sit down. David came in then, looking exhausted from a day of legal battles. He sat next to his wife. Do you remember the story I tried to tell you? I asked. The night you told me to be quiet? The story of the miller. David nodded shamefully. Yes, Mom. The miller was Thomas, I said. In 1982, Thomas was a young developer who tried to buy our neighborhood to bulldoze it. He was aggressive. He had money. Your father wanted to fight him with anger. But I went to Thomas's office. I didn't shout. I told him a story about the land, about the water table underneath it that would sink his foundation if he built there. I talked for 3 hours. I talked until he realized that buying our land would bankrupt him. I looked at David. He didn't buy the neighborhood. He bought the plot next door instead on solid ground. He made millions. He told me that my talking saved him from ruin. He told me if I ever needed a favor, I just had to ask. David's jaw dropped. Thomas Sterling? The head of Sterling Capital? The firm that holds the debt for the merger. The very same, I said, pouring tea into chipped mugs. We met with him 3 weeks ago. You were so terrified you didn't even recognize him. Wait, Elena said, her voice shaking. The meeting where the debt was restructured, where they gave us a grace period. That was you. I simply reminded Thomas of the water table, I said, sipping my tea. I told him that sinking your company would be a waste of a good structure. I told him that my son has a good heart, but he had momentarily lost his hearing. I told him that if he gave you 2 years, you would turn a profit. David stared at me. The realization washed over him, the realization that while he was mourning his career, I had already resurrected it. You saved us, David whispered. After everything we said to you, after we humiliated you, you saved us. I am a mother, I said simply. We don't stop building just because the tenants are ungrateful. The recovery was slow. They didn't get the mansion back. Not yet. They had to work. For the first time in years, I saw David and Elena actually working together. Not managing optics, but solving problems. Elena changed. The sharpness left her face. She stopped looking at her phone while people were talking. She started listening. One rainy Tuesday, the anniversary of the day I was silenced, we were sitting in the small living room. The TV was off. The rain tapped against the window. Elena cleared her throat. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small box. Alice, she said. Her voice was trembling. She opened the box. Inside was a simple silver locket. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't flashy. I know it's not much, Elena said, tears welling in her eyes. We don't have much right now, but I wanted you to have this. I opened the locket. Inside was a tiny picture of the three of us, taken at their wedding. And engraved on the opposite side were 3 words. We are listening. I looked at Elena. This woman who had once treated my voice like trash was now looking at me with a reverence I hadn't seen since David was a boy. I am so sorry, Alice, she whispered. I was so arrogant. I thought success was about speed and noise and new things. I didn't know that wisdom is the only thing that lasts. Promise you, I will never ask you to be silent again. I closed the locket and clasped it around my neck. Felt heavier than gold. Felt like victory. Thank you, Elena, I said. David leaned forward. Mom, there's a new contract coming up. The logistics are a nightmare. I was thinking we could use a specific clause, but I'm not sure. He paused. The room hung in the balance. What do you think? He asked. I smiled. It was a genuine, warm smile. The storm had passed. The house had been swept away, yes, but the home? The home was finally being built on solid rock. Well, I began, settling back into the worn armchair. It reminds me of a time your great-uncle Silas tried to sell a mule to a man from Kentucky. You see, Silas knew the mule was stubborn, but he also knew the mule could pull a plow longer than any horse. It's all about how you frame the struggle. Now, pour me another cup of tea, and I will tell you exactly how to draft that clause. For the next 2 hours, I talked, and for the first time in history, the room was completely, beautifully silent, except for the sound of my voice and the scratching of their pens on paper. They wrote down every word. And that, my dears, is the story of how silence almost destroyed a family, and how a mother's voice saved it. We often think that the elderly are just talking to hear themselves speak, that their stories are outdated dust. But we forget that they have walked the roads we are only just finding on the map. Elena learned that you cannot build a future if you disrespect the past. And David learned that a man is only as strong as the counsel he keeps. As for me, I am just happy to have my tea, my knitting, and a family that finally understands that when Grandma talks, it pays to listen. Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed this tale and want to hear more lessons from Grandma Alice's porch, please subscribe to the channel. Help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers. Like this video if you believe in the power of wisdom, and leave a comment below telling me What is the best advice an elder ever gave you? I read every single one. Until next time, keep your heart open and your ears ready. Love, Grandma Alice.